It was a legendary escape from a place that was supposed to be inescapable. 55 years ago this month, three men pulled off the impossible, breaking out of Alcatraz.
The Alcatraz escape mystery has always been more than concrete walls surrounded by cold water. It has been a question that refused to disappear, a riddle hidden beneath fog, steel, and decades of speculation. For more than 60 years, the world has looked toward that lonely island in San Francisco Bay and wondered what really happened on the night three prisoners vanished without leaving a single confirmed trace. Were Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers swallowed by the freezing waters? Or did they accomplish what experts once believed was impossible? For decades, that question seemed destined to remain unanswered. Before we go any further, make sure to subscribe to the channel and help us reach our goal of 5,000 subscribers. But in 2026, renewed attention to forensic evidence, scientific modeling, and long-overlooked investigative material has breathed new life into the Alcatraz escape mystery. Instead of closing the case, the latest analysis has reopened it, challenging assumptions that many people accepted for generations. This is no longer simply the story of an escape. It is the story of how history can change when old evidence is viewed through modern eyes. Inside America's most secure prison. To understand why the mystery still fascinates millions, you first have to understand what Alcatraz represented. Sitting 1.25 miles from the coast of San Francisco, surrounded by icy currents and unpredictable tides, the island was deliberately chosen because nature itself acted as another prison wall. Long before it became America's most feared penitentiary, Alcatraz served as a military fortress during the 19th century. In 1934, however, it was transformed into something even more intimidating, a federal prison designed for the inmates no other prison wanted to keep. Known simply as the Rock, Alcatraz became the destination for prisoners considered too violent, too disruptive, or too dangerous for ordinary institutions. Everything about the prison was designed to eliminate hope. Prisoners lived inside tiny steel cells, endured constant surveillance, and followed routines so rigid that every movement was controlled. Guards performed repeated head counts throughout the day. Conversations were limited. Privileges had to be earned, and every security measure reinforced one message: no one was ever supposed to leave. The prison itself was an engineering masterpiece of its era. Reinforced concrete walls, heavy steel bars, elevated gun galleries, controlled movement, and multiple locked checkpoints made escape appear impossible. The freezing bay surrounding the island was considered the ultimate security system. Officials believed that even if a prisoner somehow reached the shoreline, the powerful currents and cold water would finish what the prison had started. That reputation became even stronger because of the men housed there. Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and many of America's most notorious criminals eventually found themselves behind its walls. Rehabilitation was never the mission. Alcatraz existed to break resistance through complete control. Ironically, the prison that symbolized absolute security would eventually become famous for one mystery that it could never explain. The night the legend broke. For nearly 3 decades, Alcatraz had succeeded in creating an image that seemed untouchable. Every failed escape strengthened its legend. Every unsuccessful attempt convinced both prisoners and the public that the Rock truly was inescapable. Then came the night of June 11th, 1962. Somewhere between 10:30 and 11 that evening, 3 inmates, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, simply disappeared. No alarms sounded. No gunfire echoed across the bay. No witnesses reported seeing prisoners running across the island. When guards performed their routine night inspections, everything appeared perfectly normal. 3 prisoners seemed to be sleeping peacefully inside their cells. By the time the morning head count began, the illusion had collapsed. The men were gone. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in FBI history, but despite helicopters, Coast Guard patrols, divers, and thousands of investigative hours, the 3 escapees were never found. That absence of evidence changed everything. Had bodies been recovered, the story would have ended decades ago. Instead, the lack of proof transformed a prison escape into one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. The story. Everyone thought they knew. For years, the official explanation seemed straightforward. The escapees had almost certainly drowned. The waters surrounding Alcatraz were freezing. Temperatures hovered around 10 to 13 degrees Celsius, 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, while strong tidal currents could carry even experienced swimmers far out into San Francisco Bay. Officials argued that survival simply wasn't realistic. When fragments of a homemade raft, a paddle, and some personal belongings were recovered in the days following the escape, investigators concluded that the men had likely entered the water but never reached land. The FBI eventually closed its investigation in 1979, declaring the escapees legally presumed dead. To most people, that appeared to settle the mystery, but it never truly settled the evidence. No bodies were ever recovered. No confirmed deaths were ever established. And over time, small pieces of information continued appearing, each one too weak to prove survival, yet too significant to dismiss entirely. That uncertainty is exactly what has allowed the mystery to survive into the modern era. Why the story changed. Again, what makes the Alcatraz mystery so compelling today is not simply that people continue to speculate, it is that modern science has begun asking questions investigators in the 1960s could never answer. Advances in computer modeling have allowed researchers to recreate the exact tidal conditions that existed on the night of the escape. Digital simulations have demonstrated that, under very specific timing, the currents may actually have carried a homemade raft toward Angel Island instead of pulling it out into open water. That finding fundamentally changed the conversation. For decades, the assumption had been that survival was virtually impossible. Now, researchers were suggesting something very different. If the escapees launched during the correct tidal window, and if their raft performed as intended, the journey may have been physically achievable. The science did not prove they survived, but it removed one of the strongest arguments that they could not have. Suddenly, one of the FBI's biggest assumptions no longer appeared as certain as it once had. And once that assumption weakened, investigators and historians began looking again at every overlooked clue, every witness statement, every recovered object, and every unexplained lead. The mystery that had once seemed frozen in history suddenly felt alive again. Because sometimes the most important discoveries aren't new evidence at all. Sometimes they're old evidence viewed in an entirely new way. Frank Morris, the genius. Behind the plan. Among all the prisoners who attempted to escape from Alcatraz, few possessed the combination of intelligence, patience, and experience that defined Frank Lee Morris. He was not simply another inmate trying to break free. He was exactly the type of prisoner Alcatraz had been designed to contain. A man who understood prison systems, security weaknesses, and human behavior, Morris had spent much of his life learning how to challenge the very walls built to hold him. His early life was marked by instability. Orphaned at just 11 years old, Morris moved through a series of foster homes and juvenile institutions before entering a life of crime at a young age. By the time he was a teenager, He had already developed a reputation for intelligence mixed with defiance. His criminal record included armed robbery, narcotics offenses, and multiple escape attempts from previous prisons. But what separated Morris from many other inmates was not simply his criminal history. It was his ability to plan. He studied his surroundings, identified weaknesses, and waited for the right opportunity. After escaping from the Louisiana State Penitentiary, one of America's most secure prisons, Morris was transferred to Alcatraz in January 1960. To prison officials, the transfer was meant to end his escape attempts once and for all. But to Morris, arriving at Alcatraz was not the end of the road. It was the beginning of a new challenge. Almost immediately after arriving, Morris began studying the prison's routines, security patterns, and physical weaknesses. He eventually found himself housed near 3 men who would become his partners in one of the most ambitious prison escapes ever attempted: John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, and Allen West. The 4 men already knew each other from previous prison sentences. Their proximity inside Alcatraz gave them the perfect opportunity to communicate quietly, exchange ideas, and begin building a plan that would take months to complete. Morris naturally became the leader of the operation. His intelligence, patience, and previous escape experience made him the architect of the plan. Unlike earlier attempts by other prisoners, Morris understood that escaping Alcatraz would require more than strength or courage. It would require deception, engineering, timing, and absolute discipline. Every detail had to be perfect. The group began their work slowly, almost invisibly. Behind the walls of their cells, they discovered that years of exposure to salty air had weakened the concrete around the ventilation openings beneath their sinks. Using everyday objects transformed into tools, they began creating a path toward freedom. Metal spoons taken from the dining hall became digging instruments. Old saw blades were repurposed for cutting. The prisoners even constructed a homemade drill powered by a stolen vacuum cleaner motor, allowing them to remove pieces of concrete without creating obvious damage. But digging the escape route was only one part of the plan. The bigger challenge was hiding the evidence. Every morning, the prisoners needed their cells to appear untouched. To achieve this, Morris and his partners created false vent covers from papier-mâché and painted them with materials taken from the prison library and maintenance areas. From a distance, the fake grills looked almost identical to the originals, concealing the growing holes behind them. Even the sound of their work was carefully controlled. During Alcatraz's scheduled music hour, prisoners were allowed to play instruments inside their cells. Morris used this opportunity to his advantage, playing his accordion loudly enough to cover the scraping and drilling sounds coming from the walls. It was a simple idea, but it demonstrated the level of preparation behind the escape. Nothing was random. Nothing was left to chance. The plan was not just a physical breakout. It was a psychological attack against a prison built on the belief that escape was impossible. Once the tunnels were complete, the group moved to the next stage of their operation. They constructed equipment that would allow them to survive the final obstacle waiting outside the prison walls, the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay. Using more than 50 stolen raincoats, they created a large inflatable raft measuring approximately 6 by 14 feet. They also built life jackets and used steam pipes inside the prison to seal the rubber seams together. To inflate the raft, they converted a concertina into a makeshift air pump. For decades, officials believed these efforts would never be enough. They believed the bay would stop them. But Morris and the Anglin brothers had spent months preparing for the impossible. When they disappeared on the night of June 11, 1962, they did not simply escape from their cells. They challenged the entire reputation of Alcatraz. Although authorities officially concluded that the men likely drowned, no bodies were ever recovered. Years later, new claims, including the controversial 2013 letter allegedly written by John Anglin, reignited speculation that Morris and the Anglin brothers may have survived. Whether Frank Morris died in the waters of San Francisco Bay or lived the rest of his life hidden from the world remains unknown. But one thing is certain. His plan remains the most sophisticated escape attempt in Alcatraz's history, a carefully designed operation that proved even the Rock was not completely impossible to break. The Anglin brothers, the men who disappeared. John and Clarence Anglin were not simply two prisoners caught in the same escape attempt. They were brothers whose entire lives had been shaped by hardship, loyalty, and survival. Born into a poor farming family in rural Florida, the Anglins grew up as part of a large family of 13 children. Life was difficult, and from an early age, the brothers learned the importance of relying on each other. That bond would eventually become one of the most important elements of the Alcatraz escape. Their criminal activities focused mainly on bank robberies, and their repeated attempts to escape custody eventually made them a problem for prison officials. After several incidents, authorities transferred them to Alcatraz, the place considered the final destination for prisoners who could not be controlled elsewhere. But Alcatraz did not separate them from the outside world completely. Instead, it brought them back together with Frank Morris. The brothers had known Morris from previous prison sentences, and when they were placed near him and Alan West, the opportunity for collaboration appeared. Their neighboring cells allowed them to communicate quietly and develop a plan hidden from prison authorities. While Morris provided the strategic thinking, the Anglin brothers became essential to making the operation possible. They helped widen the escape tunnels, collect materials, and construct the equipment needed for their journey. They gathered supplies from prison work assignments, created disguises, and helped build the massive raincoat raft that would carry them into the darkness of San Francisco Bay. Their understanding of prison routines was equally valuable. They knew when guards checked cells, when noise could be hidden, and how to move materials without attracting attention. Every step of the operation depended on patience and discipline. Perhaps their most famous contribution was helping create the illusion that they were still sleeping inside their cells. Using soap, toothpaste, toilet paper, and real human hair collected from the prison barbershop, the escapees created realistic dummy heads. These strange-looking creations became one of the most important parts of their deception. The heads were carefully painted to resemble human skin and placed on pillows beneath blankets. Clothing and other materials were arranged underneath to create the shape of sleeping bodies. During routine night inspections, guards only glanced into the cells. They did not physically wake every prisoner, and that small detail became the foundation of the deception. For hours, the guards believed everything was normal. The prisoners were still inside, but they were not. By the time the truth was discovered during morning roll call on June 12th, Morris and the Anglin brothers had already disappeared. The mystery surrounding their fate has continued for decades. Officially, they were declared dead in 1979, but several pieces of evidence have kept the survival theory alive. Family members claim to have received Christmas cards from the brothers. A controversial photograph allegedly taken in Brazil in 1975 was also examined by some investigators who believed it might show John and Clarence Anglin. Then came the 2013 letter, which claimed that the brothers and Morris had survived the escape and lived in hiding. The evidence has never been proven, but it has also never been completely dismissed. If the Anglin brothers did survive, they achieved something far greater than escaping a prison. They disappeared from the most secure penitentiary in America and possibly vanished into ordinary life, leaving behind one of history's greatest unanswered questions. Crafting the illusion. The escape that began with a lie. The genius of the Alcatraz escape was not only hidden in the tunnels beneath the cells or the homemade raft waiting outside, it began with a carefully designed illusion. Before the prisoners could escape physically, they first had to convince everyone that they were still there. The dummy heads became the centerpiece of this deception. Created from basic materials available inside the prison, these fake heads were surprisingly realistic from a distance. Soap, toothpaste, toilet paper, and paint were combined to create human-like faces. Real hair collected from the prison barbershop was attached to complete the disguise. Placed on pillows and covered with blankets, the heads created the appearance of sleeping prisoners. The guards saw exactly what they expected to see. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. Just 3 inmates resting inside their cells. The illusion was so effective that the escape remained hidden until the following morning. But the deception went deeper than the dummy heads. Behind the cells, the prisoners had spent months creating hidden openings that led toward the service areas of the prison. During the day, those openings were covered with false ventilation grills made from cardboard and papier-mâché. The fake covers blended into the walls so effectively that anyone looking into the cells would have believed nothing had changed. The escapees had transformed their prison cells into a stage. The guards were not simply failing to notice an escape. They were watching a performance. As investigators later recognized, the Alcatraz escape was not only an engineering achievement, it was a psychological operation. Morris and the Anglin brothers understood that controlling perception was just as important as breaking through concrete. They created a false reality and allowed everyone around them to believe it. For one night, the most secure prison in America was fooled by 3 men who had already disappeared before anyone knew they were gone. But the illusion was only the beginning. The real escape was waiting beneath the surface. Digging to freedom. The hidden route beneath the rock. The escape from Alcatraz did not begin on the rooftop, in the prison yard, or on the shoreline. It began in the darkness beneath the cells, where 4 inmates slowly turned one of America's most secure prisons into their own underground construction site. Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, and Alan West discovered one of the few weaknesses in Alcatraz's legendary security system: the aging concrete surrounding the ventilation openings beneath their cell sinks. Decades of exposure to salty air had weakened the structure, creating a vulnerability that the prisoners could exploit. But exploiting that weakness required something more valuable than strength. It required patience. For months, the men worked in secret, slowly removing small pieces of concrete night after night. Their tools were simple, almost impossible to believe. Metal spoons taken from the prison dining hall became digging instruments. Old discarded saw blades were sharpened and modified for cutting. They even created a homemade drill using a stolen vacuum cleaner motor, transforming ordinary prison materials into tools capable of challenging a structure designed to keep them trapped forever. Every piece of concrete removed represented progress, but it also represented danger. A single mistake could expose the entire operation. The prisoners understood that escaping physically was only half the battle. They also needed to hide the evidence of their work from the guards who inspected their cells every day. To cover the growing holes behind their sinks, they created false ventilation covers from cardboard and papier-mâché. Using paint and supplies taken from the prison library and maintenance areas, they carefully matched the appearance of the original vents. From a quick glance, nothing appeared unusual. Behind those fake covers, however, a tunnel was slowly growing. The prisoners also found a way to defeat one of the biggest dangers in any prison escape: noise. Alcatraz had scheduled periods when inmates were allowed to play musical instruments. During these music hours, Morris used his accordion to create enough background noise to hide the sounds of scraping, drilling, and breaking concrete. The strange sound of an accordion echoing through the cell block was not a simple attempt at entertainment. It was part of an escape operation. Every note helped conceal another piece of concrete being removed. Every night brought them closer to freedom. Once the openings became large enough, the escapees crawled through the hidden passages behind their cells and entered an unguarded service area of the prison. From there, they climbed toward an unused upper section of the building, where they created a secret workshop. This forgotten area became the center of their final preparations. Here, they stored stolen materials, assembled their equipment, and continued building the objects they would need for the final stage of their escape: the raft, paddles, and survival gear. The deteriorating condition of Alcatraz itself played directly into their hands. The prison had been exposed to decades of harsh ocean weather, and parts of its aging infrastructure were no longer as secure as officials believed. The same environment that helped make Alcatraz intimidating also created hidden weaknesses. The prisoners simply found them. One of the final challenges was reaching the roof. The escapees climbed nearly 30 feet through the upper sections of the prison using plumbing pipes and carefully worked their way toward the ventilation shaft. After removing the vent cover, they needed to make sure no one would notice their work. So they created another deception. Using soap, they shaped a fake bolt and placed it where the original hardware had been, giving the appearance that nothing had been disturbed. It was a small detail, but it revealed the mindset behind the entire operation. Morris and the Anglin brothers were not relying on luck. They were building a carefully rehearsed escape where every movement, every sound, and every possible discovery had been considered. By the night they finally made their move, they had created a hidden path stretching from their cells to the prison roof. They had not simply escaped a building. They had exploited the age, design flaws, and overlooked weaknesses of the very fortress built to contain them. For the first time in Alcatraz's history, someone had found a way through. And they did it without triggering an alarm.